Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. I want to open this video with a question. Have any of you ever gotten in touch with other people, former people before you, who were hurt by the narcissist? If you've done it, drop it in the comments. And have you even thought about doing it? Have you ever thought, I want to get in touch with other people who this happened to, so I can let them know or validate them? If you've thought about it, drop that in the comments. Because what we're going to talk about in this video is whether it is wise to get in touch with former people affected by the narcissist. And again, you hopefully know by now, but someone might be new watching this. I'm Dr. Ramani. This YouTube channel takes on all kinds of issues related to narcissism. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. But let's take apart this question. And in fact, I'd love to even hear your answer to it. Is it wise to get in touch with former victims of the narcissistic person? I would actually love for all of you to speculate what you think my answer is going to be. It's a question, this particular question is one that we've actually tackled in a specific way a few years ago, actually, on this channel. And it was more specific because we were really thinking in that case about the idea of whether you should warn a new partner of the narcissist. But this is a different kind of a take on it. It's sort of a wider way to frame this question. So do you reach out and try and find former victims? I know I hate that word victims, former experiencers or people who have been burned by the narcissist that burned you. Do you do that? So let's break this down by first talking about the why. Why do people want to do this? Frankly, to me, it makes all the sense in the world that people would want to do this. Because most simply, you may be searching for validation, something, anything to clear the confusion, to reassure yourself that you aren't missing something, and most simply, to ungaslight yourself, right? Someone else went through it, you'll hear that. They'll help validate you. I can say firsthand that one of the most healing things that can happen after narcissistic abuse is the opportunity to talk with someone who has been through what you have been through with that same narcissistic person. It's like this magical moment, an instant light bulb and a hug at the same time. You recognize that your instincts were right, that you were not the only one who went through this. And frankly, that revelation can fast forward the healing process, oftentimes more quickly than anything else. Now, I know that some people want to reach out to former victims from a compassionate standpoint, especially if they have learned things that they would want to share with other people who may have gone through this, or just to help those other people, those other so-called victims, feel supported. And I understand that as well. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse are deeply empathic people who leave these relationships feeling very confused. Some even feel like they're bad people. And so the chance to pay it forward or backward, as the case may be, and help other people is something that can be very compelling to survivors. But listen, I'm always going to keep it real. And so let's keep it real. There can even be a slightly vindictive element to it, right? You got to own that. You don't want the narcissist to have gotten away with it, whatever getting away with it means, to make sure that people know, the people who knew this narcissist before knew that they were exposed to something and someone who was awful, and not wanting the former victims to let the narcissistic person off the hook. There's a real sense of injustice in narcissistic relationships, and it can feel awful to think that there are still people that are walking around the world thinking that this toxic person who did so much harm is all that and is still getting away with it. We want to put a stop to that, right? But that all the things I just said only answers the why. But the really question that was put to me is, should you reach out to these people? And that, my friends, is a very complicated question. To answer this question about whether you should reach out to former victims or people who experience the narcissist, you need to ask yourself a few questions. First of all, ask yourself when you're thinking about doing this, what is your goal? What is your end game? Why do you want to do this? Is it to genuinely help the other victims and shed light on their situation and to make sure they're okay? Is it to get more information for yourself, to find out what this person has done to other people and the lies they've told other people? Is it to help you make sense of a deeply confusing situation? Or is it maybe all of the above? Knowing that end game for yourself is crucial because you have to ask yourself, how would it feel to do this if you can't achieve those goals? Maybe the former victims don't want to talk or want to keep this chapter behind them. Maybe for legal reasons, some of them can't talk. Some of them may actually have been more harmed than you by the narcissistic person. So your contact with them may be really triggering and unsettling. Maybe they had a different experience than you or are in denial. There is that element of realistic expectations that is essential to protect yourself from getting hurt more or even feeling more gaslighted than you already were from the relationship. If you talk to a former person who was in a relationship with this narcissist and they share a different experience, it can really double down on your confusion. The second question to ask yourself is whether it's safe to talk to these people. I don't necessarily mean that they're going to physically harm you, but I have to be frank with you, you can't rule that out in some cases. But are you confident that this person, this other so-called victim, isn't still in touch with the narcissistic person or people who are still affiliated with the narcissistic person? Will your information or your story or your reach out or anything you may not want to get back to the narcissistic person? Is it possible it actually could get back to the narcissistic person and really be detrimental to you? Survivorship from narcissistic abuse is a very wide spectrum. Some people get it, they learn it, they do things like go no contact with the narcissistic person and would be very supportive of any new survivors that roll up into their life. Some people do not get it and they remain in denial and they may even be enablers. You just don't know. Some have been so traumatized that they simply do not want anyone to bring up these feelings again or this situation again. As a result, not everyone who was harmed by the narcissist is necessarily an ally for you to talk with. I have to tell you, I remember in my more naive days talking to someone I know had been harmed by a narcissistic person who had also harmed me. And I went into that conversation guns blazing, talking openly about what happened to me with the narcissist, how badly I was treated. And instead of getting validation and all kinds of, I'm sorry, or wow, and this happened to me too, I actually remember that person I was talking to almost recoiling and looking at me as though I was some kind of a monstrous person for saying these things. And then they cut me off. And from that point forward, they always kind of looked at me sideways. In this particular case, it was a long time ago, but I remember it set me way back because after that, I didn't trust my instincts as readily. And I fell way back into self-blame and viewed myself as the rotten person. Mercifully, several years down the road, I did run into other people that shared my experiences of this person, of this narcissistic person. But the initial setback really took a toll. I got to be honest, though, from that point forward, I was much more discerning and careful about ever sharing my stories with other people who may have experienced the narcissistic people who have hurt me. And often I either just keep my mouth shut or I let other people share their stories first before I'll even consider testing the waters. Another thing to consider is, will the narcissistic person find out you are reaching out to their former victims And what will they do if they know? Will they start up a smear campaign against you? Will they sick the flying monkeys on you? Will they actually reach out to you with veiled or not so veiled threats? Will they start stalking you on social media or via email or other means? Always remember, narcissistic people are much more vindictive than regular folks. So if you have the stomach for this stuff, then okay. But most people, especially survivors, don't have the stomach for it. Again, it's about being discerning. You may speak with a former victim who got burned worse than you, and you may feel very confident that they wouldn't share that they met you with the narcissist. But I got to tell you, if you are not really sure that someone's not going to go back to that narcissist, it's a risk to talk to someone. And then there's the potential legal fallout. There are laws in the United States, at least, about defaming and slandering someone in any kind of public forum. So you may want to hold off on putting out a public social media post saying, hey, calling out to anyone who may be a victim of such and such, whoever your former narcissistic person is, who is a raging narcissist, and going from there. Just not a good idea. Please don't ever do that. That may really come back to bite you. And the vindictiveness of narcissism is such that that narcissistic person will bite back twice as hard. You don't want your reach out to former victims of the narcissist to make life even more difficult for you via perhaps legal challenges. And these reach outs to other victims, if you are doing them, for example, as part of any kind of litigation you're involved with, divorce, workplace litigation, or any other form of civil litigation, reaching out to former victims may or may not help you. I am not an attorney, so you would want to seek out legal expertise. For some folks, reaching out to former victims may be worth it. I don't know if they can get the documentation or other support that could help them, but it also may put you into worse position. So again, it's really critical that you would speak to your attorney or legal advisor before pursuing any such pathways. You also want to be very careful about putting anything in writing if you were to try to reach out to other victims who are harmed by the narcissistic person. What may feel like a private email or a text exchange between two people who were harmed by the same narcissistic person, once it's out there, now it's a document you can't control because two of you have it. Anything we write in this modern age is permanent. So until you know who you are talking with, be very careful with that and try not to put anything significant in writing. The question that we originally got that was sent in here is that, is it wise for me to reach out to the former victims of the narcissist? And as you can see, the answer to that is actually quite complicated. But then there's another question that builds upon this original question is, what if the former victims reach out to me? In many ways, everything I'm saying here applies to that question as well. What's the end game? Is it safe? Are there risks of fallout legally or otherwise? Do you feel that this could be helpful or important for you or the other person to talk with them? And is it safe? Be very canny about putting things in writing. And ideally, I tell you, don't do it. And because of narcissistic people's penchant for treachery, you also want to make sure it's not the narcissists themselves setting you up. I got to tell you, since I began doing this work about 15 years ago, I went from being a trusting, sweet person to someone whose mindset feels like I constantly live in a spy novel. But it's a thing. And especially if you are going through something that's very high stakes, like a divorce or litigation, be very careful with whom you talk about and what you talk about, especially any place you're going to put something in writing. I understand completely why someone would want to reach out to other people who were burned by the narcissistic person. It is an isolating and confusing experience to be narcissistically abused. So when it happens, we try to make sense of it and find systems of meaning in what happened to us and try to ungaslight ourselves. I get all of that. But in our tricky electronic age, where it's so easy to find people, we do need to be discerning and also to be self-protective. Be aware of that the end game you want may not be possible. And don't put yourself at risk in trying to get it. Narcissistic abuse has probably already harmed you enough. There's no need to add more to that in trying a short-sighted strategy in talking to what you believe to be a former victim and potentially creating even more problems for yourself. So I hope that answers that question. And thanks again.